I'm Nicole Lee. I am a seventh year associate attorney at a firm named Gibson Dunn Crutcher. I work on general sort of commercial disputes between parties, as well as helping companies with government compliance and investigations.
The first question that I have is, what was the reason behind you deciding to become an attorney in law firm? And what stage of life was that decision actually made?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my decision actually happened pretty late in life. So as I mentioned, I went to college. I went back to Korea and I worked for SK, which is, obviously, as you know, one of the conglomerates. And frankly, I was fairly happy. The workload was a lot, and there's a lot that comes with the job. And then I realized sort of into my third year at my company that even though it was fine and it was good and it paid well, and I didn't know that that wasn't necessarily what I wanted. So I started thinking about graduate school. I majored in international politics in undergraduate. So initially my thought was maybe I want to work for the United Nations or something like that. So I interviewed for a couple of jobs, and because just with the undergraduate degree, it's just hard for anyone to navigate their way into. And, international relations is just kind of like all theories, and that's fine, but you might have a better chance if you study something more practical like the law or accounting or human resources, because these are the functions that the UN is going to need. And the study of law is actually fairly related to politics as well. So I had taken some legal classes, law classes in college. So I started looking into it a little bit. And then I think sometimes in life, certain doors open up, and it may not be the door that you think or initially thought was going to open up, but it just seems to kind of make sense. And that's how it was for me with law school. As soon as I started kind of preparing for it, just like made sense to me on a personal level. So applied to law school and went to law school thinking that I want to not become a private practicing attorney, but like go to the UN. And then my first year in law school, where you study a lot of the core curriculum, it like really clicked for me. And I was like, what, I could see myself doing this. This is actually kind of fun. And I could see myself doing this long term. So that's what brought me here. But I wasn't seriously considering being an attorney as a career choice, throughout college, or certainly, up until a few years after I graduated.
What was like one of the biggest difficulties that you had to go through in university, or like in preparation for law school, or even like studying in law school? What was the most difficult part?
I mean, there were a lot of challenges, but I think the biggest challenge probably was that I had no idea how to go about doing this. And thank God for the internet, because I knew no lawyers in the network. When I wanted to go to law school, I literally didn't know how to apply for law schools. So I had to research that. I also realized that at least in the US, once you get your law school admission, there's, they may, depending on, your LSAT score and your admission criteria, they might offer you some scholarship, right? I didn't know you can negotiate for it at all. Like, growing up in Asia, you don't negotiate with schools about how big your scholarships are going to be, right? So, and then once I started, I realized through my peers that, they've like leveraged, they kind of like played the schools against each other, which I knew nothing about. And that's just one example, right? Like, frankly, I think I went to law school really without knowing what a lot of lawyers do. Prime example being like, I am a litigation attorney and I don't go to court very often. And I think that's a good example of a misconception. I I had nobody to like go and ask, what do you do like on a day-to-day basis? Like, do you like, what kind of law are there to practice? And what are your thoughts about, like, I had just no resources, and I think all of my resources had to come from literally the internet. So that was a little bit challenging. I do think though, like, forums like this is helpful. You know, as I research, I came across like random people's blogs. So I like randomly reached out to her. And I think that's sort of what you have to do if you don't have the network or the resources to turn to, if you're the first generation of someone doing something, right? So you just have to cast the net pretty wide. You know, surprisingly, a lot of people responded to me when I like literally cold reach out to them. That's the way that I address my challenges, I guess, but it is not easy, you know, becoming, you know, having a job where no one in your network has done it. There are ways to overcome this challenge, but it is challenging.
You reckon that their, I guess, primary purpose for university should also include creating a network for law school or graduate school?
I think that, you know, networking is always really helpful, regardless of what field you go into, particularly law. And it doesn't matter what major you're in. I mean, I have a lot of coworkers who were like drama majors and English majors and history majors. And, you know, in the US, there's really no like pre-law majors. So people come from all kinds of backgrounds. And I think that's actually helpful because, I mean, the law is something that governs people's lives, right? So the breadth of knowledge is always helpful. You don't have to feel like you need to like narrow your scope and focus to the law. But if you are serious about being a lawyer, it helps to talk to some lawyers like we're doing right now. A lot of people have certain notions about the job. And the job might look really differently. Like I do litigation, so occasionally I do go to court, but there are attorneys who never see the insides of a courtroom, and they are very, you know, successful and happy attorneys. It's helpful to talk to a lot of different lawyers and get a sense of what they are doing. Just reach out to people, just ask questions and gather information. And I think that's how I would view it. Also understand the challenges, right? Because no job is going to be, you know, perfect. There are going to be some flaw in the job that you don't love, and that's why they pay you. Is you know, I mean, this might sound cold, but I think of a job as the reason why they pay you because it's not all fun. Like this is not
work.
We're not here for fun, right? And the job can be fun and enjoyable, but there are going to be some downsides of any job. So you want to kind of get a sense and see if you can live with the types of quirks. And I think even for attorneys, like my day looks dramatically different from an attorney who mainly does like mergers and acquisitions, or who does, you know, purely like government regulatory work or something. So our challenges are going to be different. Like our downsides of the job are going to be different. So don't talk to just one lawyer or like one, you know, doctor, or, you know, you want to talk to a number of them and get a sense of like, what exactly do they do? What does your day look like?
So I was wondering if there's any like those language barriers or anything that we see in those law school TV shows are real. What do you say?
You know, I thought that a lot because I was an international student at my law school, right? And I felt it, I will say. I mean, these are people who were in mock trial teams and debate teams, right, in high school and college. And I did not go to an English speaking high school or college, and that should not be a problem. And you should not let that stop you. I think especially, and I'm like obviously generalizing quite a bit, but like having grown up in an Asian culture, we're very like introspective, right? We're always like, oh, like there are so many more people that are like smarter than me and like, oh, can I make it? And you're just kind of prone to look at your flaws. I think at least I am that way. I will say one of the things that I appreciate about being a lawyer is that it really helped me kind of fight those tendencies. And I think it did me good as a person, because I'm even more so than the average person, right? I'm used to like, oh, but there are so many more like smarter people out there, and that's fine. Like we're not telling you to be the smartest person in the world, right? Like my job is to be a good lawyer and as good of a lawyer that I can be, and I don't need to feel down because somebody else speaks, better language. Because like I said, there are so many kinds of lawyers. There is no like best lawyer ever, because he can't be the best at this other type of law that he doesn't practice. As an Asian woman myself, there's a lot of like, am I good enough question, and it persists, I think, even throughout not just when you're a student, but like when you're a lawyer too. Often, at least I often feel like, is this good enough? Am I good enough? But being a lawyer, because I'm in a position to like give people advice and tell them you can do this and you should not do this because of X, Y, and Z risks. I need to be confident. Otherwise, people are not going to trust me, or I don't have the right to tell people if I'm not confident what to do. It really, I think, pushes me to feel comfortable standing on my own feet, and not to gear the conversation into any sort of racial or gender sort of dynamics, but in life generally, in your workplaces, you will see that like a lot of women, and a lot of Asian women in particular, don't market themselves or don't think of themselves as worthy as they really are. And guys tend to think that like, of course I'm qualified for the job. Why are you asking? Whether it's language, whether it's good enough for any particular job, you should just be ready to fight that. Because I think if you don't believe in yourself, like you can't ask other people to believe in yourself. So keep that in mind. In terms of legal drama, scratch everything you see on TV, I would say. There are certain TV shows I can stomach, and there are certain ones that I can't even bother. Like, I think of all of the legal TV shows I've seen, The Good Wife is probably like somewhat close to reality. All of the other shows where, they have a closing and somebody like barges in your office and be like, we have a closing at 4:00, you need to get ready. And then everyone's like frantically gathering down. And then like show up all prepared, like, negotiation, whatever. That is like so not true, because if you had a closing, you knew about it like 3 months ago, you're not prepared, you should be fired. You should have all of your documents ready. Usually the lawyers involved in the closing are not just one person. Usually no negotiation that happens at closing. Same thing with like, oh, somebody found a new piece of evidence, and then like this lawyer like has a piece of paper and he's like flailing it into the court, be like, hold on, I have a new piece of information that's going to change the course of this litigation. And the court's like, let's hear it right now. Flips the outcome of the case. Like, none of that happens. If you have evidence, it's only going to get presented at a hearing that's scheduled way out in advance. So, TV shows are made much more dramatic. There may be like some elements of the practice of law that they borrow and really kind of, and it's the same with competition. Like, sure, there's a lot of competition at law school. But people are way more passive aggressive about it than they are in TV shows. There's not a lot of like cutthroat. I think in law school, you do feel like you have to constantly study, but the best people who survive law school are the ones that have a routine. They treat it like a job. They set aside time outside of law school. Those are the people who do best in law school. I try to approach it that way. And there are competitions, but it's not nowhere as like cutthroat and dramatic as what the TV depicts it to be. If anything, I think it's like, you'd be surprised how boring it is.
Right. What does litigation attorney usually do? And what was like the biggest difficulty that you faced as a litigation attorney?
Litigation attorneys are what you think of attorneys typically. We work on lawsuits, we work on arbitrations. basically anytime there is a dispute between parties, we represent one of them. I also do white collar work, which is a little bit different in that in my white collar work, I represent companies who are subject to government investigation. We're not necessarily in a court, but I'm in front of the government a lot, and we try and do internal investigations or government required investigations and negotiate with the government, so forth. In terms of the difficulty, I mean, the intensity of the work is pretty high. Because we get paid a fairly high rate for our work and we're advising clients on what they should do, I cannot afford to make a mistake. And I think a lot of lawyers, especially at a large firm like the one that I work for, are going to be very detail-oriented people. Really, over the years, I had to push myself to get better at details because the devil is in the details. And sometimes you have good legal analysis, but if you have like a bunch of typos, you just don't come across as credible. So being much more detail-oriented than I naturally am have been hard. And, along with that, there's just the mental pressure that like you cannot afford to make a mistake. So every time I do legal research and then I report to the client or the partners I'm working with, I'm always like, is this what they really should do? Am I missing anything? And that's just a lot of mental pressure sometimes.
Considering all the efforts and the journey that you had to go through to become an attorney, do you really think all your effort was worth what you're getting, as in like money or honor or your personal sense of accomplishment?
Really, really depends on who you ask and what their value system is. If you ask me, I think so, for me, because I am the type of person who like accomplishment. Not to show people, but just to like prove to myself, like, oh, I can do this. Like I can get into certain schools. I can, get into certain law firms. I can do these things. And so the accomplishment piece is frankly fairly big for me. And I think if you ask most lawyers at large law firms, that it's probably similar. In terms of other payoff, compensation is great. Not gonna lie. I work a lot. So, at some point, people decide, it's not worth this much money if I'm only working all the time and not able to actually enjoy life. And so some people leave. And that doesn't mean that the law school education wasn't worth it or like my path to being an attorney wasn't successful. It's just what you decide to do with your degree and your I think to that end, having gone to good law school and having worked for large law firms does help in terms of like what I can do next. So in that sense, I think it has paid off and will pay off when I decide that I want to leave. In terms of personal satisfaction that being an attorney has paid off, my law firm allow pro bono work. It essentially means that we work for clients for free, not anyone, but it's people in need, right? Or NGOs with a good cause or something like that. So I've worked on several pro bono matters in my career, represented a woman who was about to be evicted and kept her in her house, represent this person who was the driver of a drunk driving incident. The other driver was represented by the public defender, so he was going to not have any representation. Our firm got appointed, and so I walked him through the guilty plea process. And I worked for an organization that needed like risk assessment. They're a cancer patient advocacy group that needed certain reviews, so we did that. So I think those things definitely make me feel like, okay, this qualification of being a lawyer can be really helpful in that, like, I actually made some difference in these people's lives, and I work with real clients that I can put faces to, and that makes me happy. I mean, that's not the entirety of what I do. Obviously, I'm not gonna put a sugarcoat on it, but the job allows me to do it. So I, appreciate that part of the job. Like, I am an attorney that works for a big law firm. I'm not the only type of attorney, but in my case, the pay is great. work is too much all the time and too stressful all the time, but there's much more feelings of accomplishment if you do something more difficult. There's like a huge sense of like, oh, I am a person who is capable of doing these things. And I think those aspects of the job make it worth it.
We are applying to university and we all want to go to like those prestigious name value universities and like name value law schools, but do you really think those prestigiousness of each schools that we go necessarily matters to your own success in the field of law?
Really going to depend on who you ask. You know, people have different ways of going about achieving what each of us define as success, depending on their value system and how they were raised and what they're doing now. And in the legal field that I am in now, if you're opening up your own shop as an attorney, it doesn't matter what school you go to as long as you're good. You could go to a local law school that is generally just only known in that state or whatever. A lot of my friends practice kind of locally, and that's totally fine. And they're good lawyers. They're not any worse lawyers than I am, you know, just because they practice in a small town in Wisconsin like that, you know, they're living very happily as attorneys. But if you want to work for, you know, a big name prestigious law firm and work for clients who are all like companies that you've heard of in your daily lives, you should probably go to a prestigious law school. Like there's no question about that, you know, and I think among the top 10 or, you know, I think they used to, in the US, they keep referring to a T14, the top 14 law schools for whatever reason, the cutoff is at 14. That does matter in terms of what kind of law firms you can get into. I mean, I was kind of like brainwashed or, you know, trained from earlier on that like I wanted to go to a top university. I wanted to work for a company that everybody recognizes. Then I wanted to go to a law school and I didn't want to go to just like some law school that no one's heard of. Like I wanted to go to a top law school. I wanted to then like, once I decided that I wanted to be in private practice, I wanted to work for a firm that everybody recognizes. Is that the only correct path? No, right? But does that open up doors later? Yes.
Now, panels, please turn on your microphones, and if you have any questions, please ask Ms. Lee.
And I was wondering if there's any job responsibility and if you took any like additional training to become an attorney. And lastly, but was it ever nervous standing in the court as an attorney?
So getting in the court is always nervous, even for senior attorneys. It's always nerve-wracking, and that's probably good because I think do a lot of preparation because we don't want to fail. And sometimes that pushes us to be better attorneys. So yes, being in court is always frightening and it always like freaks me out. But thankfully I haven't had like a major mishap or anything in court. In terms of other sort of qualifications or preparations I had to do, not really anything other than going to law school, but there are a lot of different things in law school that you can do to be better prepared for the field that you're interested in. I did moot court, which means you like write briefs and try a fake case. Moot court and mock trial, a little bit different. Moot court is mostly just oral argument. You write a brief and you're in front of a judge and you're just arguing. Mock trial is when you like call witnesses and question witnesses. I did not do mock trial. I did moot court, which is a little bit more like geared towards oral advocacy and brief writing and researching. And I found that pretty helpful. But apart from that, I don't think there was anything else. And then my general job responsibilities, I mean, really range from anything between like talking to the client on case strategy, what we think the case strategy should be, what they want to accomplish. What gets depicted in the legal shows is only like the part where you're in court. But before that, there's months of like exchanging emails and letters to the other side, asking for information, demanding information. If they don't give you information, you have to file a motion to the court. and you have to like write briefs to do that. Once they give you a bunch of information, then you have to go through it to understand, right, what it is that you like need from the information. In this day and age, the volume of information that parties exchange in a lawsuit is like millions of pages. You're trying to like go through, my day looks like lots of emails about these sorts of things, calls with clients. Sometimes I'm sitting down writing briefs or presentations, and very rarely, I will say, most of my clients are corporations, and most corporate clients don't like going to trial because it's one, very expensive. Like each trial for a corporate client is probably going to run like easily millions of dollars, if not more. And so unless what's at stake is like hundreds of millions of dollars, it's one, not worth going to court, and two, like juries are very unpredictable. So if you have $500 million at stake, it's a little bit nervous to just leave it to like 12 random people, right? So that's why trials and actually going to court are not as common these days.
What was your reason behind for choosing a specific litigation attorney? And like if you had any like second choice to choose a different field or type of law, what would you choose?
At least in the US, people generally classify what kind of attorney you are in two categories. So one is litigation, and litigation can include a lot of different things. And then the other bucket is called transactional or corporate. These are the people who look at like, who draft contract. I never draft contracts. Who review contracts, who are involved in like large transactions. If a company is buying another company, that sort of thing, I'm never involved in that kind of stuff. And in law school, you have 2 summers and you have to do internships for law firms as what you call a summer associate. And then that's often how you get your job offer for after you graduate. So during my second summer, I worked for a different law firm, a US law firm. And I did a little bit of both. I did some corporate work, and then I did some litigation work. The litigation work just came much more naturally to me. I just felt like I get it, like I'm interested in finding out more. It just felt like it jives with me so much more. The corporate work, I had to keep like telling myself like, oh, this is like really educational. I'm probably learning a lot from this experience. This is like good for me. But at the end of the day, I couldn't really like get into it. So I think that was a good indication. Corporate attorneys generally, a lot of their job is like predicting what the problem is going to be, and then they structure the contract or the corporate deal around it. And when company A is buying company B, this company is in the US, this company is in Korea, there are going to be some tax issues, there are going to be like blah, blah, blah corporate issues. They draft the contract so that it kind of like works around those and addresses those problems. And then I think a lot of what litigation attorneys do is like, once something goes wrong, it's our job to figure out how to like fix it. When you're in a lawsuit, someone's already pissed at the other person or other party. They're suing each other. My job is to try to figure out like, okay, what are the issues? What are our strong arguments? Like something's already happened. I'm going to go like fix a problem or and I just have a tendency naturally to be much more of a fixer, problem fixer. And I just felt like I much better like knowing, okay, something went wrong or something went down. It's my job to like go figure it out. Like that's much more interesting to me. So that's essentially why I picked litigation.
Is there any certain major that is more helpful for work as a lawyer in the future?
There's really not. And the reason why I say this is because it's, again, so being a lawyer is a little bit different from like being a doctor, in that if you wanted to be a doctor, you should probably take biology, you should probably take chemistry and, that sort of thing. Being a lawyer, you can be a really good lawyer as a prior music major. I work with one now, and he doesn't do like copyright law or anything. He does like a completely different area of law, but he's like very, very like good. And you can be a good lawyer after like majoring in chemical engineering, and you can be a good lawyer. You'll find if you go to law school in the US, at least, a lot of people are political science majors like me, because when you're political science majors, you're just more aware of legal issues and you pay more attention to politicians and what's happening in the legislations, and you want to be a part of it. And that, like, I think naturally drives people to law school. But you know, they're really like a lot of English majors, a lot of history majors, etc. I will say, if you want to be a good lawyer, generally you have to like reading. If you don't like reading, this is probably not the job for you, because you have a lot to read. But yeah.
Okay. I have another question. So to be a lawyer, there's a lot of stuff that I have to go through, like go to law school and then take a test and then go to law for more or somewhere else. So like, I know it will be depends on the person, but how long, like averagely, like how long does it take to be like?
So you can, a lot of my friends are straight throughs, which means they went to law school the fall of the same year that they graduate from college, and 3 years in law school. And then what typically happens is after the 3 years of law school, you graduate in May, there's a bar exam in July, you take the bar exam. By this point, in most cases, especially if you're working for a big law firm, the stuff that I'm saying really applies to the big law firm track, or what in the US they sort of shorten it and say like big law. So this is the big law track, is typically after your second year. Okay, I'll backtrack. If you're working for a big law, this is usually what's going to happen. You go into a top law school, you finish the first year, and then sometime in the summer of after your first year, they do what's called OCI. It's called on-campus interviews. So this is where like a lot of the big law firms come to the school and they interview you and they see if they want to bring you on as a summer associate the next year. So say I start law school in 2020, fall of 2020. This summer, I'm doing OCIs with big law firms. There are some genius kids who get into big laws in their first summer. It's pretty rare. So then I worked for a big law as a summer associate in the summer of 2022. And then after the summer's ended, or when it's ending, they'll tell me, okay, you have an offer to come back after you graduate or not. So by the time you graduate, you already know where you're going to be working after you graduate. Frankly, you already kind of know as a second year law school student, a lot of you, and that's like the ideal, because you don't have to worry about the job search anymore. So you graduate in May, you take the bar exam in July. You should have worked really hard so you pass the bar exam, because generally what happens is you start working for the law firm in like October, or sometimes a little bit later, but usually around October, which is also around the time that they announce the bar exam results. So it gets a little bit awkward if you start the job and then you're like, actually, I didn't pass the bar exam. I need to take it one more time. And most law firms be like, okay, you're not the first person, it's fine. So you take the bar exam again in February. The bar exams are in July and February in most states. So, the fastest track would be you go through college, you spend 3 years in law school, and you start, right after you start as a full-time attorney right after you graduate from law school. I obviously took the long track and took 4 years between college and law school. And I personally think that was helpful, just because I felt like I had a sense of purpose. Like I knew why I wanted to go to law school. It wasn't just something that I did because I wasn't sure what to do after college. And, you know, I like had worked pretty hard in working for a Korean company. So law school, frankly, didn't feel like a lot of work to me. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it wasn't so overwhelming that I was like, I can't like handle it. Whereas I have seen some people who come straight through from college to law school who just felt like law school was miserable, because these are like their prime years, early to mid 20s, and all they're doing is just like being stuck in the library and studying all the time, reading. Like I will show you. This is my textbook for one class.
Oh my God.
And, you have like 4 classes, and this is like you're reading like 50 pages for a class a day. You're like, this is just miserable. Like, I don't want to be doing this. I didn't have that because like I worked a lot for a Korean company before I joined law school, and I was like, this is like, you know, not bad. Like I don't have the Jung calling me every hour, be like, where's the report? Like, can you get that to me in the next hour? I'm like, okay, fine, you know. And so I was completely on my own time and working to better myself. And so like law school didn't feel so hard for me, but like if you've just finished college and then you're carrying like 4 of these guys a day, you're like, yeah, what am I doing with my life? So it could be good. If you are very sure you want to be a lawyer, it could be good to go straight through, but there's no rush really. If you wanted to go straight through, you need to be taking the LSAT and getting your recommendation letters from professors and things like that in your junior year of college, probably.
Oh, about that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain more about LSAT and the bar exam thing?
Mm-hmm. So LSAT is the test that you have to take to get into law school. I think different schools have different policies in terms of like if you take it for more than it's similar to like SAT, right? Like you can take it multiple times. I think LSAT you can take up to 3 times in a 2-year span. And some schools are going to look at your latest score. Some schools are going to look at your highest score. I think the full score, it's been 10 years or longer since I took it, but if I remember correctly, the full score is 180. If you want to get into a T14, people say it's gone down by a couple points because more people or law schools are having slightly harder times recruiting more students. But in the year that I was applying, like if you wanted to get into a top 10 or 14 school, you really needed a 170 and higher. You could get in with like a high 160 to like maybe a top 14 or 20 school. But if you wanted to be somewhat safe, you needed to be 170. If you needed scholarship, obviously, like the better, the higher the better. And then there are 2 types of law degrees you can get. I'll just go into this really briefly. In the US, there are 2 types of law degrees. There's a 1-year master's program called LLM. And then there's a 3-year more traditional like Juris Doctor program. It's funny they call it a doctor because it's not like any other doctorate degree. Other doctorate degrees, they actually do like a lot of studying and they like have to work years and spend time in labs and all this. Like ours is just, you know, it's a different beast. But there's a JD degree. I have the JD degree and most people do. going back to the point about like not really knowing what these things are, right? Like I didn't even know that I could apply to LLM because technically my bachelor's degree is a Bachelor of Law. And if you have like prior legal experience, or if you have a bachelor's degree from another country, they'll let you do the LLM instead. Which at the time I thought, oh, that's like great. You get to work as a lawyer and you only need to study for a year. That's great. But most big firms don't hire LLMs. So if LLMs are helpful if you are a Korea licensed lawyer and you want to like build your practice and like learn more about the US law and add your qualification. But if you want to practice in the US, you should probably not get an LLM. So I want to clarify. I feel like there was something else I was going to tell you about.
So how long did you prepare for the LSAT? And like
so I was working full time for Taekyo when I was preparing for my LSAT, so it took me a little longer. And I frankly wish I had prepared better because my LSAT score wasn't the highest. I think I spent about 6 months, but I think you want to, you want to do a lot of practice exams. If you can avoid it, you don't want to take it multiple times. It's really best if you can get the kind of score you want the first time. And it takes, at least when I was taking it, it took like a couple of months for me to get the score. So, and most law schools, like most top law schools, I should say, deadline for applications is like January 1st of the year that you want to go to. And they have rolling admission, which means the earlier you apply, the better your chances are of getting in. I'm sure you're familiar with the whole application process as you're applying to colleges. So I would say if you're aiming for a top law school, one of the top law schools, you should probably get your application in probably no later than like October or November at the very latest, early November. Which then means you want to have an LSAT score that you know you can use by like October, right? You don't want to have the score come out in October and you're like, oh, that's like 10 points lower than what I want it to be. Then you're a little too late. So I would suggest taking it like earlier in the year, before the year that you want to actually go to law school, so that you have the test score ready. And just going back to the bar exam, so LSAT I think was 3 hours, 4 hours, I forget. Something along those, it was like an afternoon or a morning or something along those lines. The bar exam, depending on where you take it, is like 2 to 3 days. And it's a lot of, they give you a facts pattern, they'll say like, here's corporation A and here's corporation B, they're in this kind of dispute, blah, 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 blah. And then they'll ask you a question, you have to write essays. So the jurisdiction that I took it in, which is DC, had 1 day of essay questions and then 1 day of what they call MBE. It's all like multiple choice questions. I think the MBE might be universal, like fairly universal. And other jurisdictions like California and Texas have an extra day of essay questions.
Well, so beyond the LSAT, what can like help students applying for law school to like be stand out in an application? So like what other qualification that we can
you have to have a really good GPA. So GPA and LSAT, obviously, like in the law school application process, if they're both good, obviously the best. If your GPA is on the lower side, then your LSAT needs to be like really good. If your LSAT's not as great maybe, but you have a really good GPA, then you might have a good chance. My GPA from my university, we were on a 4.0, and I think mine was like 3.4, which is not that high. I mean, I was competing with, if you do go to law school, you'll realize like, these are all kids who are very like accomplishment and achievement driven already, like, right? And then you're like, all of these people are applying, they're selecting the best of the best. And a lot of times you feel like, well, there were times that I felt like, I don't know how I got in, like, given that this other kid who had a 4.0 GPA got in. I did not have that. Same thing in law firms. Like, you know, I mean, I got in and I'm, again, like, I must have gotten in because I'm qualified, but I also have friends who had 4.0 GPAs in law schools. So, you know, you should definitely, your chances of getting in a good school, if you have like a low 3s GPA, is frankly pretty low. So you need to make sure that your GPA in college is above average at a minimum. You know, all the better if it's higher. And then you have the personal statement that most people want you to write. It's basically like your essay on why you want to be a lawyer or why you want to go to law school. And I think I needed 2 recommendation letters from my professors, just saying like, you know, I'm academically driven and I'm not a slacker, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, if you're interested in going to law school, you should think about like keeping in touch with your professors and making sure that at least a couple of them know you enough to vouch for you. Thank you.
Yeah,
you guys have a
okay.
great weekend. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you.
Bye.